This was a debate held in this year's Republican presidential primary in New Hampshire, 2 days before New Hampshire voted in their primary this year. The debate was sponsored by the Manchester Union Leader newspaper. Now, a few weeks before this debate in January, that same newspaper hosting the debate endorsed one of these candidates in the race. They endorsed Newt Gingrich for the Republican nomination. So technically, while they were sponsoring this debate, they had a horse in the race. They had endorsed one of the candidates. Nobody much cared because that's kind of a normal thing about debates. Here's a debate a couple of months ago in the Austin, Texas mayor's race, sponsored by the Austin American Statesman newspaper, which endorsed the older guy on the right there, the current mayor, the guy who just saw a second ago, him. This was a debate held in the 1994 Massachusetts Senate race between Ted Kennedy and a guy you might have heard of named Mitt Romney. That debate was sponsored by the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. The Boston Globe endorsed Ted Kennedy that year. The Boston Herald endorsed Mitt Romney that year. The organizations that sponsor debates sometimes also endorse one of the candidates in those debates. It happens all the time at every level of debating. This year in Massachusetts, U.S. Senator Scott Brown is running for re-election against Elizabeth Warren. Before Scott Brown, the seat in the Senate that he currently holds now was held for decades by Ted Kennedy, by Senator Edward M. Kennedy. Asked to participate in a debate sponsored by the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, Scott Brown this year decided there is a new rule for debates. He said he would not participate in that Kennedy Institute debate if anybody associated with the Kennedy Institute was going to make an endorsement in the race. Now, he didn't just mean somebody who was going to be moderating the debate and actually asking the questions or anything like that. What Republican Senator Scott Brown insisted on, rather, was that the widow of Ted Kennedy personally be banned from making an endorsement in the Senate race because she has an association with her late husband's institute. I mean, to be clear, there was never any indication that Vicki Kennedy was going to be participating in the debate in any way or asking the questions or anything like that. Just because she is associated with the institute named for her late husband, Scott Brown said that he forbid her from making any endorsement in that election, before the debate, after the debate, ever, all the way through to the election. Scott Brown's condition for accepting that debate was a personal endorsement ban on the late Ted Kennedy's wife. If he didn't get that, he said, that debate just wouldn't be fair. When Ted Kennedy's widow, Vicki Kennedy, responded exactly the way you think somebody would respond to something like that, Scott Brown said that he would not participate in the debate. But he said he would like to do a debate on a conservative talk radio show in Boston, hosted by a man who says he is a personal friend of Scott Brown and his wife. So that's where Scott Brown is tonight. He's having a debate on a conservative talk radio show in Boston, hosted by his friend. And he is having that debate alone. Joining us here now, without Scott Brown, is his opponent, Elizabeth Warren. She was scheduled for this interview a long time ago, before it was clear Scott Brown would be debating himself alone tonight. So the timing of all this, Scott Brown on his friend's radio show and Elizabeth Warren here now, this, frankly, is all just a fun coincidence. Blessed be the news gods. Elizabeth Warren, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Has your campaign been able to sit down with Senator Brown's campaign and hammer out terms for debates? Normally, this stuff does not all happen in public. It's just kind of worked out of the spotlight.
You know, look, I don't get how this would have worked out, but after I got the nomination 3 weeks ago for the Democratic nomination to run for the Senate, the next Monday morning, we sent an email over to Scott Brown's office and said, gosh, we've gotten a lot of invitations for debates. We figure you've got a lot of invitations. Let's sit down. Let's sort them all out. Let's talk them through. And let's figure out how many debates we can do, where they'll be. Let's be sure we get some diversity, you know, all around the state. And they said, no. And I really mean this. When they called me back and told me that, they said no. I said, what do you mean they said no? And they said no. They won't sit down and talk about it. They won't even talk about the debates. So then Scott Brown's campaign manager started accepting some debates like this one you just mentioned and refusing others. And so the whole thing has been 3 weeks of kind of this public thing over debates, including the business around the Kennedy Institute, and including now 2 regional debates, one in Worcester and one in New Bedford down on the South Coast, that would involve some important regional issues. And he's just said, no, not doing them. So that's where we are. We've got 4 television debates, which I think is good, but it took a lot of effort to get him there, and I really genuinely wish that we had more, because there are a lot of issues that we should be talking about. I genuinely wish we were going to be in Central Mass and that we were going to be down in Southern Mass. And I think it's a mistake not to do that, but I think it's hard to debate alone. So there we are.
Well, Scott Brown attempted it tonight on his friend's radio show. And we listened in on the interview. And one of the things that he said is he made some news. Do we actually have the sound of this? We have the sound of this, so we can actually play. He was asked about the vote tomorrow, due to happen tomorrow in the House, about Attorney General Eric Holder. He called for Eric Holder's resignation. Listen.
Attorney General Holder, he can't effectively serve the president anymore. And for the best interest of the country, I feel he should step down and resign. And it's really, he's lost the confidence of the American people.
This is the first time, I believe, that Scott Brown has called for the Attorney General to resign. What's your response to that, and what's your take on that same issue?
You know, just one more politician. I mean, this is really all about politics and playing this game in Washington. And the Republicans think they've got something here, and he's just seeing if he can turn up the temperature on it. I think this is why people get disgusted by politics. I think this is why people say, I don't want anything to do with it. You know, I go around the Commonwealth here in Massachusetts, and when I meet with people, meet with big groups of people, I'll ask, how many people in here are either out of work or have someone in your family, someone you love, care about who's out of work, someone you know intimately? Hands go up all over the room. There were 3 jobs bills last fall, 3 jobs bills that would have supported jobs here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Scott Brown voted against all 3 of them. We should be talking about that. We should be talking about why that happens, not playing political games. We should be talking about how kids are going to pay for a college education. We should be talking about accountability on Wall Street and whether or not J.P. Morgan and the kind of practices it still engages in put our economy at risk. There's really serious stuff on the table, and that's what it is we should be talking about.
Right now in Massachusetts, home sales are up. They're up for 5 straight months now. They're up 35% over this time last year. Is Massachusetts into a solid recovery? And what is the most urgent federal policy matter that would help Massachusetts further?
Well, home sales are up, but foreclosures are also up. There are a lot of people who are underwater on their mortgages here in Massachusetts. We've had 47,000 people who've lost their homes since the beginning of the crisis in 2008. I look at it this way. Massachusetts is recovering better than much of the rest of the country, and that's partly because we have made a lot of investments in our people here in Massachusetts and trying to keep our infrastructure going so that businesses can flourish here and trying to help our kids get educated. But we can't do this alone. The country is in trouble, and Massachusetts still has a lot of work to do on the jobs front, on the education front, on the infrastructure front. There's a lot we have to do here.
In terms of national politics right now and the way that your candidacy has, I think, captured the imagination of a lot of progressives around the country, liberals have been excited about your candidacy, about the way that you have talked about some economic issues, fairness in the tax code and things like that. One of the things that everybody in the country is on the edge of their seats about right now is what the Supreme Court is going to do tomorrow. It seems from reading the political body language that the Republicans think that the Supreme Court is going to strike down health reform, and Democrats seem to be worried that that is going to happen. Do you have a prediction, and how do you think the country should greet the potential striking down of health reform? What should we do next if that's what the Supreme Court does tomorrow?
Well, no, I don't have a prediction. I don't know what they'll do tomorrow. I have my own view that based on the legal precedents, it's clear that the Affordable Care Act is constitutional, but whether or not 5 justices in the Supreme Court will decide that that's the case, I don't know. You know, I want to use this, so we're just going to have to see what happens on affordable care before we figure out what the right thing to do is by way of response. But we need to use this moment to reflect on the importance of the Supreme Court and who sits on the Supreme Court. You know, it's not so long ago that we had the Citizens United opinion and then saw just this week, see it reinforced that the same 5 justices are saying, hey, corporate interests can just take the electoral process by the throat and squeeze as hard as they want. You know, the Supreme Court is wading into really deep waters, and they're doing it in ways that are, I think, that worry us all. And it's a reminder that who sits in the United States Senate to review those nominations, to vote on those nominations, really does matter. And so I think it will be about the Affordable Care Act tomorrow, but it will also be about the Supreme Court tomorrow.
Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic candidate for Senate in Massachusetts, thank you for being with us tonight, and good luck working out that debate schedule with your opponent. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Scott Brown, anytime. Rachel@msnbc.com is my email address. Be happy to, you're welcome here anytime. All right, everybody, raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I state your name, pledge allegiance to Mitt Romney. Listen, you can do it with me now asking, or you can do it later with a Republican official demanding it. That story is next. I state your name,